Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
Good evening. In my case, it's good morning, but really all of that is irrelevant in the context of how I feel. I feel so deeply honored to be conducting and shepherding this conversation with somebody who is very, very beloved to me. Not just me, to the world at large. I would say one of India's finest writers by far, an artist, a very, very sensitive soul, and also an individual with a wicked sense of humor who has an incredible knack of translating very difficult events around us. And through his incredibly poetic, elegiac prose. And so it gives me great, great pleasure to welcome my dear friend, my ally, and really a treasure of this world, Siddharth Shanghvi. Sid, are you there?
I'm very much here. Can you see me?
Go on. There he is. There he is. I feel so much better now that you've joined me on the screen, because it is a little bit surreal. As Angad mentioned, I've appeared at the Quorum Club almost a year ago, or probably over a year ago. And this is a little bit surreal. How do you feel, Sid, about talking about your book in the middle of a pandemic and having to speak about everything in this new format?
Well, first of all, I'm so thrilled that I'm having this conversation with you, and that you have privileged me by waking up at 5:30 in the morning. You know, what an honor, what a gift. And also that, I get so seldom to speak with you that I want to cherish every single moment, and this is just the start of a fantastic conversation with you about loss, because we haven't spoken since you read it. So even for me, this is such an entry point. And what I would say that while I'm completely undeserving of every wonderful thing that you said, and while I accept all of it very gratefully, I can't stress enough of how beautiful your book is, and the exquisite things that you've had to say and close to the bone, and how lucky I was to be a part of the process of you writing it and bearing witness to it. So I thank you again for allowing me the trespass for that.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I mean, I don't know what to say, because every time I read your words, something moves in me, and it's two things, I guess, both as a writer and as a reader. And this is the exquisite book Loss that we are talking about. It's a highly polished gem. It's just exquisite. It's distilled down these incredible truths, and on the back it really says something very, very another hard-won truth. I would say it says grief is not a record of what has been lost, but of who has been loved. So first of all, for our audience, I know a little bit about what prompted you to write this book. So the book is essentially, it's obviously nonfiction. I would term it deeply personal, and yet at the same time, utterly universal, as is the experience of death, grief, loss, mourning, and living really at large. And I wanted to actually start by reading a passage which is actually in the preface, and it says, "This is what you must leave behind: everything. These are the people to thank. Pay your bills, even if it's a sock drawer. Leave it pretty, or at the very least, neat. What matters is how you make someone feel. This book was an organization of socks inside socks, which is to say, it was an ordinary thing that had to be done." Just think about that, everyone. It was an ordinary thing that had to be done. Meanwhile, death was an extraordinary thing staring at us through the window of a terrible, terrible year. Like a mirror devouring a mirror, the events of my parents' deaths swallowed me, so I could write this book, a reflection over life's opposite thing. Its redemption, its truth, its purpose, its meaning. My parents had been teaching me how to leave the room after a party. A friend said she imagined that I wore only black at home, which couldn't be further from the truth. And I just thought that that would be a wonderful way to sort of really kick off our conversation into perhaps starting out with what was the prompt for you to write a book of essays, because you are, of course, renowned for your fiction. This is, I think, one thing that strikes me is the innate vulnerability in loss as well, how you had to literally reach into your own chest and actually present your heart on a plate. So can you speak a little bit for our audience as to what prompted loss and what was the genesis of this incredible book?
Well, thank you for that wonderful, deep question, and I wouldn't expect anything less from you. I'm also I'm so happy that I didn't wear black because I would have just proved myself wrong.
And I almost wore black as well. I was actually going through my closet trying to find something other than black, because, of course, I'm sitting in the middle of winter out here in Canada, and it's a little grim and gray.
So I don't know what the starting point really was. There are many ways of looking at it. On a very superficial level, there were just that I had a contract with HarperCollins of putting together essays, my collected published nonfiction over the years of 20 years of writing. But when I was kind of reading through that work, it was the first essay, the one on losing my dad, that held its own. It had a kind of a very sincere sadness. It had a kind of tremor of authenticity, which the other works perhaps didn't have as much. And so I wanted to follow what would happen if I looked at just that one essay. What could I build on that? And logically, it became about the death of my mother and the death of the dog. But when you write about death, or coming close to death, as you have written about, and close to the bone, is the recognition of how extraordinary it is to have been alive. This huge weight of not taking every single moment as profoundly and as powerfully as if it were your last. So I think writing about it was preparing for that. Writing about it was to say that, wow, this was an opportunity I was given. And if I look back, what is it that I must collect? A lot of people have asked me, Lisa, if writing about death and writing about grief was an act of catharsis, whether it was to kind of set aside these sorrows and these debts. And I would only think, why would I? These debts were so fundamental. They were a kind of scholarship. How dare I say that, the only thing I want to do is to be rid of them. The only thing I want to do is to forget these people. No, what I wanted to do was to look them in the eye, even after they had gone, and to see the extraordinariness, the eventfulness of their lives and how it had influenced me. So I think that we sometimes take it a little lightly, and we take, the language around it is about getting over grief, or this very American idea of healing, which I find very, very superficial. I think that wounds can be your greatest scholarship if you allow them, as I'm sure you know already. And so I wanted to take stock of that. I wanted to live my wound. I didn't want to deny me what it is that I had lost, because it actually comprised me. It made me who I am.
That makes a lot of sense to me. And I sort of, it resonates with me in the sense of that idea of, writing being therapy, as opposed to it, becoming more bearing witness, perhaps, as well, creating.
It's our work, Lisa, it's the work that you and I do.
Yeah, it's what we do. It's how we engage with the world, because as you and I have discussed many, many times, much to people's surprise, we're introverts, we're shy, don't enjoy often, engaging with large groups of people. And so this is a way also of creating a connection as well with the world. And this, I think, is, has provided a very, very deep and enduring connection, straight, from not just the mind, but from the heart. That's what I felt. So, actually, I'm still going to circle back and be a little bit be a little persistent and a little bit irritating, because I still do want to know, as a writer though, how did the process of writing this change you, if at all? Did you see any kind of did you surprise yourself? Did you surprise yourself in writing it? Or was it a process of, I know how I'm going to lay this out, I understand the story that I want to tell? Or did you find that the story was being told as you wrote it?
I think, Lisa, this was a book that grew me up. This book became my parent, and it became a passport into a different kind of adulthood. I've been very lucky to have lived a vaguely glamorous life, a vaguely privileged life in Bombay.
With a lot of wit, which you write about with a lot of wit, actually, a lot of self-deprecation.
But it was also a swan song to that life. It was a swan song. I was so happy to have engaged with those superficialities at that point of time in my life, if only that I could set them aside. I think there's somebody had asked Vikram Seth many years ago about his early poems and asked him if he was embarrassed by them, as writers often can be, by their first works, by their first books. And I think he said something to the effect of, if I hadn't been writing them then, I would be writing them now. So I'm so glad that I did what I had to do, lived the life that I had to, so that I could come to this place. And that's what loss did. It kind of allowed me to exfoliate so much of what was superficial, extraneous, irrelevant in my life, and to look at life through the lens of death, through the lens of grieving, and to take full ownership of that, to take full ownership of the wound. Not to heal, but to recognize how I had been cut, and how essential that was for the person that I am presently.
You write also, or you touch on this idea as well of the death, particularly in India, but I would probably extrapolate everywhere in the world, is a very ritualized sociological kind of a event. And often what ends up happening, and you write about it beautifully, that in the process of, sort of that particular all-encompassing ritual of calling relatives, of, being at the receiving end of everybody else's grief as well, and condolences, we sort of maybe lose the fact, or lose sight of the fact, that it's such a mysterious cosmic event, both for the person who has passed and, and the person who is left behind is also irretrievably changed. Do you want to speak a little bit about your revelations on that particular aspect of death?
Absolutely, and I'd circle it right back to you. And I think that one of the reasons we have the kind of honest friendship that you and I do is because although we meet seldom, I remember very clearly how you and Farooq came to see me after my dad died, and we sat on the same sofa that my father used to sit and read The Times of India. And so while, we might not necessarily connect all the time, we're not, in each other's space, you have a different life and so do I. The fact that we've been present at these very integral transition points in our lives and have been able to bear witness to that allows us to have more authentic relationships. Don't ever forget that grief and death can be an aperture not only for your own transformation, but the transformation of the relationships around you. So as coda to what I'm saying, I would add is that it sounds really harsh, but all the people who were unable to see me for my sorrow and my suffering were also people that I became fundamentally, they became invisible to me at a certain point of time. So people who couldn't understand, engage, and empathize and recognize that sorrow were people that it wasn't that I consciously disengaged. It wasn't that I was angry with them. It wasn't that I was harsh or I was calculating and saying that, you weren't present and therefore I'm punishing you. It was that, they hadn't seen me in my entirety. So if there's one thing that I would say to people, if they're listening at this point of time, is be present for people when they're grieving. Not a lot of people will remember you for all the times you showed up for a party. They won't always remember you because, there were selfies at 2 a.m. in the morning, although that can be great fun, and there's a room and space and time for that. And we've done it when you came to Sunaparanta, to Goa, and we hung out. But the time that you were there present for somebody else's sorrow, that kind of bearing witness allows you to really profoundly deepen a relationship. Also, great forgivenesses can happen. People you haven't seen, lovers, relatives you've been estranged from. So much of that can be set aside in that moment of death when you come to honor a life that has come to pass. Use that opportunity. Use that moment of transformation. It's not just one person who is leaving, but it is the life that has been left behind, and what it is that how you are now left to engage with. That's really profound and important.
No, I love how you touch on presence, because it's something that's not touched on a lot in our world at all today. And I think that true presence also comes with a measure of mindfulness, of course, and also one of our favorite topics, which is silence and stillness.
Yeah.
And I wanted to also touch on, of course, the fact that you have chosen to base yourself in Goa for the last few years. And you also write about it extremely eloquently in loss. And that's, again, what was, I want to add, what was incredibly cathartic for me was, again, how vulnerable and how truthful you were, and how it became then a vessel for the reader to be relaxed into, to also to be able to, I guess, see our own lives in a clearer light. And that takes a lot of courage, Sid. So thank you so much for that. But so basing yourself in Goa is very conscious, as we know. And, as you touched on, you've passed through a phase of being more of a social butterfly, as many of us have, and have now landed in a place which is a lot more, as you have described yourself, monk-like. It's in its solitariness, in its solitude, in its, I guess, mindfulness as well. And you write about that beautifully. How would you say that also your present circumstances, the choices that you have taken in your lifestyle, Goa, and your solitude, how has that informed your view of loss and writing this book?
Wow, Lisa, somebody's going to give you an award for the deepest questions and for articulating them with
Don't worry, I'll lighten it up after this, please.
grace and clarity.
But it's definitely that we both discuss as well. Yeah. And you write on quite often also in a lot of your essays as well, published also before loss.
Lisa, if I hadn't lived the life that I did in my 20s and 30s, I would be leading it now, much like the analogy of poetry that Vikram said about his early work. So I'm so glad I did, and I'm sure having been the face of so many international brands and of being, in the limelight, that one of the best things you can do is to set it aside, because you've had it, because you've enjoyed it, and then to say, thank you so much for playing this role in my life, and I can now kind of transition to where I need to be. But the courage that you speak about comes, I think, quite specifically from exclusion, from the exclusion of really, I mean, my life is getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. It is chanting, it is writing, it is reading, it is going to the beach, it is playing with my dogs. If that is interspersed with a few wonderful conversations now and again on the phone, or if I meet a friend once a week, that's great. But most of my life is lived with a kind of monk-like, I wouldn't say austerity, but a cleanliness, and so that's where the courage to write this book comes from. And the clarity, the clarity of intent to say, I want to write a book like Loss. I would also add to that wonderful description that you gave in your question, what parented this book was nature. We never talk about, and we never talk enough about how nature influences writing and artists' lives, because artists and writers are supposed to live in big cities. They're supposed to do the circuit. They're supposed to meet and move in a certain kind of milieu, as I have. But when you're able to set it aside, you recognize the overwhelming profundity of nature and how it gives moments of transformation daily. And that's what came to loss. It was those walks in the fields of Albuna all by myself. It was, living through harrowing monsoons without electricity and power, and boiling water to have, a bucket bath. All of that, comes into the book, or I hope it does, or it certainly has come into me, which has allowed me to write the kind of book that I've been able to. But I wondered at a certain point of time, the setting aside, of the known world is absolutely essential so that we can know the unknown. You have to be at the threshold of that kind of darkness to be able to, and that's where the exclusion comes in. That's where you just turn around to people and say, I love to see you, but I'm just going to be sitting at home and reading. I really, really want to engage, but this is where I'm at in life. I remember there was an interview of Toni Morrison when she was talking about being a single mother, raising her kids, getting up at 4:00 every day to write, and then leaving at 6:00 to work. So much so that she had to begin to start sleeping at 7:30 and 8 every evening so that she could have this. And that became, something that I really reflected on and looked up to. If you can set aside, if you can give up this idea of a social life, the idea that you have to go out and engage and how ridiculous that is, and how irrelevant that is. A different world presents itself, and it is out of that world that loss, I think, came to be.
So that actually provokes my next question, which is sort of turning this idea of grief and loss on its head, and how and death, indeed, and how it actually encourages us to invest even deeper in life, in a more fulsome way, in a more urgent way. Or in a more vital way. And but the portrait of your mother, Padmini, has just really, really, seeped into me. It's seeped into my bones, and it's such an incredible homage to an incredible spirit. I can see her, and at the same time, this is a parallel in our lives, because I've written about how my mother, who was very much an anchor of my life, and who, I find myself becoming increasingly as I get older. But she also suffered for much of her life due to, a sort of an act of God, a terrible accident that we were involved in. And it was very, a little surreal for me to read, because I didn't know that part of your personal history, that your mother had been living pain for so long. And it was strange. It hit me very, very, it cut me at times. And you write about that very beautifully. But before we go into that, I want to actually touch on your incredible portrait of Padmini. Of course, there's an incredible portrait of your father as well, and Bruschetta is also absolutely unforgettable. Everything about it. But what struck me about Padmini again was her humor, her wit, her incredible investment in living, alongside the pain. And I was wondering if you could, for our audience, perhaps if you'll indulge us in narrating probably one of the, laugh out loud passages, where I'm going with this, of Padmini's request to you to bring back massager And the reason I'm linking that is because it actually, again, you describe this. I want you to actually narrate that because I have seen you narrate it beautifully. And also because, you know, at the end of it, you also conclude that your mother was someone who could see through the fakeness, who saved you from the fraudulence of dinner parties. And I couldn't help but like laugh out loud. I'm not sure if anyone else out there can completely, you know, relate to that. I'm sure people are nodding at home. So please tell us the story of Padmini and the massager.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for laying the ground down for that anecdote. My mom was severely disabled. She had rheumatoid arthritis, which invaded her entire body at some point of time. She'd had her hips replaced, her knees replaced. She went around from using a walker to being in a wheelchair to being ultimately in a bed for the last 10 years of her life when she could even move left or right. So around the time that she became ill, I was a student in, like a decade into her being ill, I was a student in America. And she called me up one day and she said that she wanted me to, so I'm just going to read you what she requested.
Absolutely.
Get me a big, strong vibrator when you come home in the winter. My mother called me to say, I was 22, living in the downtown purgatory of San Jose, Northern California. A bedsit in a yellow cottage rented out to a pack of student reptiles. My jaw clenched. Was my mother asking me to bring her a personal pleasure device? When I mentioned this to my sister, she clarified. She's been watching those horrible home shopping networks. The portable massagers are a sellout this season, but they call them vibrators on the telly, she said. I found a big red vibrator or massager at the Kmart in San Jose, where it was stocked next to the bread section. When I gave her the massager that I had bought for her, my mother held it in her arms as if it were a baby. I'm going to use my vibrator every day, she promised me, her eyes welling up with gratitude. I think you can call it a massager, I said. She appeared not to heed my suggestion. I love my present, she said. In my 20s, after the success of my first book, I sometimes hosted dinner parties, which at the time I considered a legitimate form of civic merriment. I felt a particular pride of adhering to ritual, a semi-functional adult male embarking on the bourgeois preamble to a lifetime of phony banter. At one such dinner, as I was serving the food, a scream interrupted the elegant, pointless chatter about the semicolon's new designation as an affectation. Where is my vibrator? Guests at the dinner table froze. A few seconds later, my mother screamed again, where is my vibrator?
I just...
A gathering of low life expectancy editors, stilettoed heiresses, and diplomats, I explained that my mother was unwell and that she used a massager to relieve her aching muscles. Someone might have moved the massager from its place on a bed, resulting in this impassioned and shrill query. Later, I realized that my mother had only been warning me. Dinner parties are for deadbeats. 11 years have gone by since that dinner and that scandalous scream. Now, I will never hear my mother's voice again. So...
I need to let that sink in.
A question about...
I actually wanted to enjoin you with reading, I think, a complimentary passage that, I mean, there's so much in this book. It will, as I've heard a few other people say, it will remain by my bedside. Mm. It is all dog-eared, it is, you know, highlighted, it is, I've written in the margins, and I will return to it again and again. And it's a true gift to the world. Are
you going to read something?
I'm reading something. At the age of 42, I have set aside much of my past, though not through erasure, but by acceptance. When I'm swimming in the sea, as I do each evening, it is possible to go out so deep that you can no longer see the shore. I might feel marooned, helpless, or I might thrill from an overwhelming sense of abandon. A plover comes into view, then a grove of pines. The shore is there, of course. I can see it, smooth white sand undulations. I swim back to the shore, wondering where my mother is. After all these years, I am still looking for my mother. Mm. And I think that, again, I am going to resist this temptation, which is just kind of the strange human impulse to ask, well, what do you want people to get from your book? Because it is already the sort of book that just creates, as I mentioned, an incredible vessel for each reader to immerse themselves in and to really find themselves in as well. So that's, a completely superfluous question. Mm. And I hope that everyone is getting a taste, at least little tastes of the, I don't know what to say, honestly. I'm sometimes wordless. I'm wordless. It's the writing, of course, is so elegant. Mm. But we know also, I think, as readers, understand there's a huge difference between beautiful prose and truth. Mm-hmm. And this is really, it simply is a book of truth. You could have just as easily called it truth as loss. And there's so much more that I could say, that we could go on and on and on about, but I think that we are going to open it up also to questions from our audience as well. But I just, again, wanted to emphasize and tell, share with our audience that this is a book that will remain with you for years and years and years. You've really, Sid, you've created something enduring. You've created something that is, I think, necessary, essential, boiled down to its essence. And we've discussed this, actually. One other thing, just maybe more of a writing question, mm-hmm. to end on just for the moment, is, again, you are known for your fiction. Mm-hmm. You have an incredible body of work of fiction behind you. And this is a work that is not just nonfiction, but really distilled down. Mm. And in terms of the process of writing, I have heard you also speak about how writing is very collaborative, and you're always so gracious with acknowledging the people who help you, the editors, and the support that you get.
Like you.
You are
invaluable to me.
And supporters beyond valuable in that journey. It's very, very lonely. But how was it a conscious decision to distill it down to its essence? What was the actual process of writing? Okay, this is the writer in me wanting to understand. How were you able to write such an essential book? Stripped still, in your signature, beautiful prose, but stripped down. How difficult was that, and what was that process?
So that happened thanks to the pandemic, Lisa, because the book was ready to come out in February last year, and then the pandemic happened, and I was marooned. I was stuck alone in this house in North Goa, and I went to my editor and said, can I edit this book all over again? And can you just give me that opportunity? So this really daunting solitude that I was going to be here alone with nobody around me for I don't know how long, I had to turn around and use that time to strip this bone, the book down to its bone, get it as close to the bone as I possibly could. And that's where it happened. I just wanted to very quickly circle back to something that you said earlier on about my mother. And there are two things that I want to highlight about her. One of the things she did was she cooked for people, Lisa. If you were there, she would have made something for you. And I always remember how even when she was on that bed, unable to move left or right, she had a portable stove that was brought to her bedside. And she would make poha, or she would make sabudana khichdi. And then she would be sending this out, to women who were sick, to her friends who had, grandchildren. So I love the fact, this image of her being able to feed other people's spirits, minds, bodies, from the space that she was. She really was, and blooming from where she was planted. She really was operating out of her sorrow, her pain, and her suffering. And she was able to mitigate that for other people. That I thought was something very special about her. The other thing that I want to very quickly add is that, when she was really alive, it was a very difficult, tempestuous relationship that I had with her, because looking after somebody who is not well, and particularly if you're a child for that person, as you know, is a very exhausting thing. I now think of death as a cosmic pause between two people and their lives, so that you can step back and say how wonderful you are, how wonderful, how lucky that I'm not involved in the busyness of caring for you or you caring for me. And I can see you as you are, as somebody who made these beautiful things, who wrote poetry in her spare time, who loved her kids beyond measure, who fed people. That fundamental role of her being able to extend herself in these numerous ways is something that I hold on to. And the third thing, when you ask me that what would you like a reader to take away, is I've been wanting very much to sit down with every single reader who is struggling with loss, who is struggling with the guilt that comes, of being alive and of having to bear witness to somebody else's death. The one thing I would want to say to each of them is that you did everything just right. You did everything that you possibly could. So please stop beating yourself up over it. Everything about you is perfect. You did the best job that you could. That's really what I wanted very much for people to be able to get out of reading loss. If I can say that about my parents and my dog and my relationship with them, I hope that could be something of residual worth. And how lucky I am that I can have this conversation with you, that somebody as clumsy with language as I am, you could bring the best things out for me. So thank you, really, Lisa, for your presence, for your mindfulness, and for being able to always see the best in other people.
I need to also perhaps end on one more note. And, I realized that, I wanted to say that loss is so universal and so deeply personal. I keep going back to that because that is, a miracle really in this book. And, Sid writes about bruschetta. He writes about the love and companionship that we derive from our pets. And that's something, and what a terrible loss it is when they leave us. And that's something that's not touched on so often. And you write incredibly eloquently about that. And of course, your father, again, an incredible portrait of a towering man. I can see him now, and I see, what's interesting is I see bits of you in him. And I think that what I wanted to also end on is also legacy and what has been passed on. And I remember how beautifully you wrote about the fact that your father had these tapering fingers, very much like your own. And it's like doing a little bit of a, standing. I often do that these days. I say that, and it's transformed my relationship with myself in subtle ways. I used to make a joke about myself because my mother, of course, is Polish. My father is Indian. And I used to say, I've inherited my mother's Eastern European, upper arms, and hips and thighs and things like that. And today when I look at it, it's without that kind of judgment, and it's been transformed into affection. It's more like, look, I've got my mother's arms.
Yeah.
And also what is incredible, what the one of the finishing notes that we're left with in loss is your mother's legacy and what she passed on to you. And that is words. That is so powerful, and how that has actually become a bridge between you two. And in fact, in some strange way, perhaps again, this book is her also speaking through you. I can't help but think that as a reader, that's my own little personal fantasy and projection.
Yeah, no question about it. But to that, the only thing I would say is how wonderful was my father, because he would come home from work and he would tell my mom to recite something that she had written, some poem that she had written, or read out sections of Sharat Chandra, which my mom loved. So they had this wonderful relationship where even if there was a lot of trauma and a lot of heartache, they could appreciate the best thing about the other, or bring the best thing out in the other. And I love that. And one of the things that my father always said to me was, write something every day. He was the best writing coach on this planet. He said to me from the age of 10 and 11, write something every day. And that's the lesson that I would pass on to anybody who asks me, how do I become a writer? Write something every day. That's how you become a writer. It's very simple.
Sid, we could go on and on and on. And I myself am also delighted just to see you and have this conversation, even though I feel like, I again, for the audience, I just wanted to give a little bit even more context, because that's, again, what makes us very special is that Sid and I met in Goa. I don't even know how, like a few years ago. It feels it could be decades or centuries ago, but we met through a common lifetimes, and it was an instant connection. And in fact, I was at that moment looking for someone, or I have a flat in Bombay, and I was very unhappy. I was going to office after office, and nobody understood what I was looking for in terms of creating a space. And at that time, my book hadn't come out, and I was seeing it as kind of a little bit of a little sanctuary from which I could write and watch the world go by and not engage too closely with it. And it was so strange. I walked into your house and it was just one of those instant things. It's definitely a past life connection. Do
you remember that line, Lisa, by Patti Smith in Just Kids, when she says, recognizing the same quality of immediacy in a relationship with Robert Mapplethorpe. And she reflects back on it 25 years later when she says, lives that cross again.
Yeah.
And
I think there's a point, absolutely. There's been many intersection points, and they continue. And as you said, we don't necessarily jump on the phone and talk every day, but you are one of the reasons why I also, why my book came out, Close to the Bone, played a huge role in that. Even now, as I'm working on my next book, I need to share with you.
Can you tell us a little what it's about?
I was laboring in a very different direction, and one message you sent me back on the path. So I need to thank you. Yeah. That is a beautiful, I don't know, it's a jugalbandi,
I'm going to make up a reading list for you and send it to you.
Okay, done. And I'm making my way back to Asia soon. So we will unite as well. But I know that I have to open it up. I can't, keep you to myself. So I know that we have to open this up to the floor. And I'm hoping that... Angad, are you there? I think that I will have to, stop my video. And Sid, I think you stay and let's just see what Angad has to say.
Not at all, Lisa. You can most definitely stay on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Angad, yes, we would love to throw it open to some questions now. It's always a really delightful part of any literary talk.
We've got a lot of comments and questions coming in through our audience that's tuned in. I mean, we never do this, but I'd like to go through a lot of things that people have said,
comments,
how they've helped, how loss has helped them.
Oh yes, please, wonderful, please.
So somebody says that for years that they were trying to deal with the loss of their own parents, and it was for quite a long time that they were in that grief. And Siddharth, your book helped her check her capacity to deal with loss, and after years of suffering in that grief, your book helped her out of that. So she's very thankful. That's Aruna from, I don't know exactly where, but Aruna writes that. Also, another comment from Ram. He says that he happened to stumble upon this conversation on social media and the link completely by accident. And he almost wants to thank God because he loves this interaction, and how it reminded him about how he had to deal with his loss of his parents. And basically, you both made his evening. Also, a lot of compliments for you, Lisa, where people are requesting you to do this more often, where you
Yes.
get on webinars and do more online videos.
I will. I do it for Sid. I do it for the Quorum Club. That's my
So what you should do is you should do it with Pico Iyer.
yeah. You connected me with him, and that would be a thrill.
You should do it with Pico.
I just wanted to circle back very quickly, and as I touched on, both Sid and I also are, we have a face of, a world facing kind of aspect that appears to be very comfortable in social situations. And I'm sorry, but I am going to out Sid on this. We're both deeply uncomfortable with often very big social situations. Sid was so kind. He did the same for me when my book released in Goa. He organized an incredible event that was literally still, lingers in my memory. But that is also why, we're enjoying this because I love the book beyond measure. Okay. I don't think I've actually said that enough. Beyond measure. I was trying to contain myself and be a little professional about it and not get too emotional, but beyond measure, I'm going to tear up. I love Sid beyond measure. And the Quorum Club, I think, is one of India's finest cultural clubs. So thank you so much for that comment. But honestly, it would probably shorten my life if I did this more often, because this is an unusual circumstances, and I feel very comfortable and comforted and things like that. Otherwise, I honestly am, and I think because I'm in the middle of writing, and Sid, maybe you can relate to this. I feel I've become much more internal now. In fact, there's days when I find it difficult to talk. Like I find that I lose the ability, yes, and I'm very comfortable with that. Yeah. But thank you for the comments as well.
We're slightly running out of time, but we can definitely fit a few questions in. So you guys have covered a lot of what's being asked here, but let's take one. All right. So somebody asked that this is for Siddharth. Siddharth, why, despite knowing about death, because it's a common thing around us, why is it that we get lost in the sadness, even though it's a known fact that everybody has to die at one point? Why do we get lost in the sadness once we lose a beloved parent or anybody close to us?
Because no death is common. Because no life is common. Every life is singular, precious, beautiful, profound, and known by that person. So the weight that comes with that is the weight of the knowledge of the other person. And that's what, so I think I speak about it in the book that, when you lose somebody, there are two deaths that happen. One is the loss of the physical presence of the person, and you'll never see them, they're gone forever. But the other more subtle death is the death of the person we were around them and because of them. The kind of humor that they inspire, the kind of confidences that you could keep because of that person's listening. My mother, the way that she listened to me, and the person that I became because of her listening. That person is gone. So not only are you mourning the physical death of the person who's gone, but you're also mourning and recognizing. And that's something that's not always talked about, that very subtle psychological effacement that happens, that version. I don't know, Lisa, was that true for you when your mom came to pass, that, a specific kind of Lisa Ray that was there with her and because of her, that never came back?
I think, yes, I absolutely agree with that. I went through an experience where, leading up to my mother's death, it became a beautiful release. And that didn't, that didn't at all mitigate the grief.
Yeah.
But because my mother also suffered so greatly, from pain and loss of also the woman that she was as well. But she wasn't able to, physically. And my mother, it's so funny when you said that, my mother also showed her love through food and feeding people and taking after. She was very much a nurturer. And when that was taken away from her, it was devastating. It was already a devastating loss. So I felt like I lost her twice. I lost them that I grew up with as a child, once through the accident and from the loss of her mobility, and then I lost her a second time. But I had been sort of doing my experiments with Buddhism, and as we everybody sort of knows, even in passing, that Buddhism talks about this this idea of attachment and how it is a source of our suffering in life, and that if we can again mitigate our attachments in a way, and the Buddha of course shows us a way. That's the Dharma, and for a while I really stuck to that idea. And
Lisa, dinner parties are a source of suffering.
Yes. All of our attachments are, and for a while, because I was trying to figure it out. And let me also say that, Buddhism allowed me to allow my mother to go to release her. I don't think I would have been able to then, because again, it was also an entanglement. It was again a very tempestuous relationship. But I also now today have circled back to this idea that I'm not trying to transcend my attachments anymore. I'm not trying to transcend my grief. I'm not trying to, become superhuman or, even touch Buddhahood. Honestly, I'm a human and I own that today. And in that, as you have written about, and what I found a relief in finding, is that it's enough to bear witness. It's enough to bear witness. That's what we are. Maybe that's what not all of us is, we're not even meant to transcend the pain and the grief. I think it's okay to bear witness.
Living truly invites grace. And that's what you've been doing. You've been living truly over and over and again. And that's what's invited the grace that informs every single word that you write, every single word that you speak. I just feel the grace in this moment. I feel giddy with delight from knowing you, but also being in presence with you.
And I feel the same. It's incredible. Sorry, everyone, that you have to also bear witness to this.
You have to keep it professional.
We haven't been able to see each other. So we've had this very, very deep interaction. All of our interactions are sort of a mixture, a juxtaposition of
the ridiculous of the sublime.
And that's another thing that I want to actually leave everyone with. And that's also what I was left with in loss, is the juxtaposition, the absurdity of life. 1 minute, again, we're crying, and the next minute we're laughing and we're giddy and we're silly. And that really is a life fully lived and touched. And we can, I think what is also beautiful is that you never write about, again, healing from grief or necessarily transcending grief. It's just that we live with it. So sort of to answer that question of pain, I think that the pain might lessen with time, but maybe it never goes away, and we have to accept that, because the more that we resist something, it becomes a tension in our body and in our, So I would actually say it's okay. Embrace it. It's only often society and other people's judgment and comments that make us feel that something is wrong because I'm crying all the time or I'm feeling sad. There's nothing wrong with sadness. Life is weird and sad quite often, or more often than not.
Yeah.
Lisa, you actually answered the neck. I mean, you've.
Oh, I'm sorry. I know you've got to stop me. I'm sorry.
Because Because there was somebody who was asking that, Siddharth, after watching a lot of your interviews and books, and after reading a lot of your books, you've mentioned in the past that the concept of healing is very Western in context. So, as an individual who's brought up in Tibet and in the Indian culture, and is now living in Canada, I grapple with this notion after he read your book. So, could you elaborate or substantiate that? I mean, Lisa kind of did touch on that, but so he means that how is healing a Western concept, and why would you?
Well, I never say it was a Western concept. What I think I meant, Angad, was that this slightly American notion of healing as something that happens. It's almost as if a door will close, another will open, and you'll walk into a new room, and everything will be okay. I think if you are honest to your life and honest to your life experience, you know that your pain will always remain. The volume on it, turns itself down over time, and that comes with the force of living. But the pain, the loss, always remains. It never goes away. So to think that you can come into this conversation thinking that you will sometimes heal, that you will sometimes be okay and you mend, that's not it. I sometimes think of it as a patchwork quilt, and every little patch in it is essential for the entirety of that quilt. So you're just going to live with those patches for as long as you are around. Just make it as beautiful as possible.
So beautiful. If I might just also quickly add just one thought, I think it's not so much the concept of healing as much as even the word that's being bandied around constantly, right? It's because of those buzzwords, hashtag healing. And I think that in that the meaning is obscured somehow, or it's been changed and kind of also altered, so that it's something that people say often, and too often, and with that use, that's also what I felt when Sid said that. It's like, of course, yes, it doesn't capture the spectrum and the nuance and the complexity of each individual's experience, and rather than banding together as we are healing together, it's impossible to do that because each individual is so different in their experience.
But also, why would you want to set aside the pain that's grown you up? Why would you want to set aside the pain that hallmarks you as an adult, that distinguishes you from everyone else? You just don't want it to disable you, but you can learn to, yeah.
No, exactly. And also, to all the points that we made before, I mean, pain is really important. It's part of the whole spectrum of being a human, a very important sadness as well as anger. And we're so encouraged to repress certain sides of ourselves. And that, I mean, I'm sitting here in North America, so I can attest to that there's a deep discomfort with expressing the full spectrum of sadness and pain often.
Both of you kind of sort of start answering the next question before it's even asked, but it's spooky, but it's a good question to end on. So this is for the both of you. So what's the biggest lesson or something positive that you've learned from the loss of life of a close one? Like, what's the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Lisa, go ahead.
No, Sid, I insist.
I
think that's why Sid wrote this book. So, all the lesson, all the wisdom, and all the wit.
Lisa, I'm going to ask you to answer it, and I'm going to pick up and end with the passage that answers the question that Amma has raised.
Okay, absolutely, fair enough. What is the biggest lesson? Honestly, that's...
Any positive that, like you mentioned, that the pain helps with the growth of the individual as well. So that's a positive that you can. I mean,
absolutely. I almost forget to say that because it's become so self-evident in my life. I have lived through a great deal of personal trauma over the last little while, and I don't at all even see it that way. Actually, I think what pain has helped me do, and really embracing it and not pushing it aside, is to reframe my experiences so that I don't look at life in terms of black and white and good and bad. This is a positive experience, this is a negative experience, and often that's what we do with something like death and loss, right? It has these sort of negative connotations and, I feel so sorry for you, it's so sad. Whereas I don't see it that way. I really, really don't. I see each thing as a rite of passage, as a beautiful experience. And I try not to label it. Even with the passing of my mother, it's complicated. Of course, there's grief. Grief is not a bad thing. Pain is not a bad thing. Anger even is not a bad thing. So it's helped me to accept myself as a human being, as opposed to rejecting certain parts of myself, which I think actually can lead to actually a lot of strange dysfunction in yourself, because you're judging yourself. You're not loving all of yourself. You're not accepting all of yourself.
So Angad, can I just respond to that, and maybe we close that our conversation with a passage from the first essay, where I had lost my father when he was in Bombay and I was in Jaisalmer, and 2 years after his passing, I mustered the courage to go back to Jaisalmer, and I just want to read a passage from that second trip. Why I had returned to Jaisalmer, I had no idea. But what I got out of that trip is something you might know already, that you will go on. My father's death was an insurmountable truth, but with time, its terror had paled to become what it was, a fact, but not the truth. On my stroll at sunset, a memory of my childhood returned. As children, after dinner, my father would insist that my sisters and I walk the long, straight length of the compound in our house. To us as kids, these walks were deathly dull. Although later I would come to see walking as a way of thinking, of airing the mind. On these walks, my father told us stories. Once upon a time, he started, in a magical kingdom there lived. Those early stories of animals in the jungle, of escape artists and runaway princesses, of witches and dwarves, were a powerful introduction to story listening and a prelude to reading. The cultural historian Marina Warner discovered that in Arabic, the root for the word watering, rawa, is the same as for a storyteller, ravi, and it implied that narration is irrigation. My father was out every night, walking his kids, telling them stories, making sure that his garden would one day bloom. Thank you, Papa. I get that now. I get you now. I hope it's not too late. And so what I would say is that it's never too late, and I'm proof of that. Keep loving and keep living and keep reading and writing. Lisa, come back. I miss you.
Soon, very soon. I love you. Thank you. Thank you for trusting me with this, and thank you for this conversation.
Thank you, Saloni. Thank you, Angad. Thank you to the entire team of the Quorum Club. So wonderful.
It was our pleasure. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And again, thank you so much, Lisa and Siddharth, for doing this. I mean, we're looking forward to having you at the club in person the next time.
So Lisa has to write a book, and then I'm going to come to the Quorum Club and talk to her about it. So that's a deal, right?
We already put it in our future calendar, whenever that is, Lisa.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Sid.